Today we are doing the first sort of session back into the RStats Bootcamp, and this sort of bootcamp is supposed to be a simple introductory sort of session or sessions to using R in terms of trying to help with not just how to use R, but how to make your sort of research reproducible. And this sort of involves some practical tasks that you can do yourself, and you can also do the bootcamp as many times as you like, just guiding yourself through the information on the webpage. And we do have quite a friendly community here at Harper regarding sort of stats help. If you're a PhD student, you can get in touch via a link that you should have received from Izzy in order to get some assistance on stats analysis as well. And then, if you have any questions throughout this, you can ask me. We also often will have other people from the group giving presentations as well, and they might be able to provide some help too. Now, you might be wondering why there is a random picture of a duck on this slide, and it's actually not that random at all. So what it is there's this sort of idea in data science, computer science, that sort of area, that when you're sort of writing your code, often you might come across a problem and you can't quite figure out what's wrong, whether it be an error or something along those lines. And so the idea is that if you can try and explain what you are trying to do in simple terms that are simple enough that something like a rubber duck could in theory understand what you're trying to do and what problems you're having, that it might help you to understand your problem in a different way and help you solve that problem. And so as such, even I have some little rubber ducks on my desk. So that is what the talk to the duck situation is all about. So as I said, we are starting the RStats Bootcamp, and before Christmas we'll be running through 6 different sessions, 1 session every week, and these are part of the first module of the RStats Bootcamp, which is sort of focusing more on the general introduction to R and the R environment, and then after Christmas we can start on module 2, which is looking more at statistical analyses in R. So for this session, we're going to talk a little bit about why you might want to use R for your data analysis, as well as for those who might not have any experience previously with R, looking at what different ways that you could install R in RStudio. And then we'll look a little bit at the components and how it's set up before going through some quick little tips for best practice workflow of scripts in R. And then we can look at some practice exercises. If we have time, we can do them together. So why might you want to use R to do your statistical analysis? Many people would argue that it's some of the best statistical software out there that's available. And this is partly due to the fact that it's free, it's open source, and it works well on a range of sort of computers and operating systems. And you can generally do a wide range of statistical analysis with little difficulty, though one could argue that it can be difficult when you're first starting out, but in time you'll be able to do it with ease. So it is designed for people that maybe don't have any programming experience, and it's designed from a viewpoint of sort of data science and statistical analysis rather than something like web development. So you can do similar things in R as well. And because it is free and open source, it means that there is actually a very large community of people that use R. And this works out really well because it means if you come across an error, chances are someone else has had this error previously. So you can pop over to Google and type in your error, and something might come up on Stack Overflow that could give you some help on resolving that problem. But it also means that there are people that are constantly working and developing RStudio and what it can provide, which can help you continuously build on your analysis skills. And R can be easy to learn. It can seem quite daunting to begin with, and it might seem as though you learn a lot about what you don't know. But I promise that no matter where you are along the journey of data science, whether you're feeling like the little duckling at the end of this picture that's falling over, or even if you feel like you're the matriarchal duck, there's always something to learn. And once you get into it, it becomes easier. So in order to use R, there are multiple different sort of solutions that you could go for. So you can either install R and RStudio locally. So to do that, you can go to this link here. I'll just drop this in the chat as well. Now, what you can see here is that you have to install R and install RStudio. Now, that's because RStudio is something called an IDE, which stands for Interactive Development Environment. And basically, RStudio is essentially a more user-friendly sort of interface for you to interact with the R programming language. So then we also have the option to do POSIT Cloud, and POSIT is the company that sort of developed RStudio. And you can sort of log in, and this is generally what you'll see. And if you were to start a new project, it would look very similar to what RStudio looks like when you open RStudio. And then finally, there is also the option of using Google Colab. A lot of people will use this for sort of programming related to Python, but it is possible to do R programming in here as well. So there's sort of three ways that you can use R. So this is what R looks like if you were to open just R, not RStudio. And I think it's relatively clear that it's very limited in its ease of use here. There's little description about what anything is or what you're supposed to do. And so it can seem a bit daunting. And so comparatively, we can use RStudio, which whilst it looks like there's a lot more going on here, it's a little bit more organized and a little bit easier to understand and use. So up here, we have what is known as your script area. So when you open a script, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, this is sort of generally where you'll see your script show up in RStudio. Then underneath that, you have another sort of section. These are all called panes. So this is your console pane, where basically what you'll see in your console will be any sort of output you might get from any analysis that you've run in your script, or potentially in your console, you can run the odd line of code in there as well, and that will also show your results from that code too. Then up here, we have what is called our global environment, and this basically will sort of show you what you have stored in your RStudio. So this can be anything from your data sets to particular variables to functions that you've created and things along those lines. And it can sort of give you a little bit of information about them. And then down here in this bottom corner, we have what is called the plot pane, but you can also see sort of other things in there like your files and your working directory, as well as if you want to get help on a particular package, you can get it to show up in the help panel down here as well. So what actually is an R script? So an R script is basically essentially like a plain text file. So if you were to open Notepad on the computer, that is essentially the same sort of syntax that we're using. The only difference really is that instead of ending in .txt, it ends in .r. And the way that this script will work is that it basically acts like an instruction manual that you are writing and asking the console to sort of do. So essentially, if you were trying to make a cake, you would write the recipe in your script file, and then you could give that script file to your console, who is commonly referred to by Ed as the passive-aggressive butler. You could give your recipe to them, and they would then look at that recipe and would hopefully produce your cake. Although there is always the possibility that they might get partway through and go, oh no, there's something wrong here. And then they'll come back to you and say, hey guys, there's something wrong here. This is the issue. Can you help me fix it? And then another positive of an R script is that it helps you sort of document your analysis and keep sort of track of what you're doing. And this works really well when you're able to keep it in an organized, logical manner, not just for yourself when you're actually writing the script, but for other people that might look at it, such as supervisors or even yourself in the future. So this is a little bit of a closer look at what the R script might look like. So you can sort of see here, you have numbers down here with the different lines, and you also have a save button up here, and there's some ways that you can run your code here as well. And you'll see down at the bottom that it's set to an R script, and that at the top it's saved as script-1.r. Now, RStudio does support a lot of other languages, so you could change that down here at the bottom, but we're not going to worry about that too much. And then this is sort of what the console looks like. So here I have these bottom bits of code down here. I have asked it to make a box plot, which shows up in your plot sort of pane like this. But what you can also see here is where I've uploaded this data. You can sort of click this little button here, and it will show you a little bit more about what data you have, the different variables, what type of data they are, and that sort of thing. And then also, as I was saying before, you have your files pane, which is the same pane as your plots pane, but you just click over here for files, and it will show you your working directory and the files that are in your working directory. And if you're not sure about what your working directory is, there are different ways of sort of looking at that. And you can also set your working directory by clicking on this settings button. So one of the biggest bits of advice when it comes to using R and writing scripts is to try and write your script as though you're showing it to someone at some stage, whether that is your supervisor or even your future self. I know that when I've done analysis in the past, especially during my PhD, sometimes you wouldn't necessarily get the ability to go from the start to the end of your analysis without being interrupted by maybe another experiment or having to write something up. And so if you have time periods between looking at your scripts, it's really useful if you have sort of kept them organized and neat and described enough in them so that when you come back maybe a week or two later, you can be like, okay, this is what I did, or this is what I was trying to do, this is where I got stuck, etc., etc. Now you might be wondering who this picture is here, and this is a guy called R.A. Fisher. Ed is a massive fan of this person, and this is basically who Ed looks up to and who Ed tries to write his scripts for. I cannot remember off the top of my head exactly what he did, but he is pretty big in the world of statistics, and Ed will probably crucify me later for not being able to remember that. But yeah, so think of anyone that might be able to benefit from your script in the future and try and write it in a sort of organized way. So there is also something in RStudio called R projects, and this is essentially a different way of setting up RStudio so that your working directory is sort of linked to a particular project, and the files for that project are sort of automatically put into your working directory so that you don't have to use the set WD line of code and potentially type in a really long working directory, especially if you're using sort of a Harper computer. The directories to get to a certain point can be ridiculously long. So I'll show you how to set that up in R in a little bit. So I was talking about having organized scripts, and sort of on the very basic level of organizing your scripts, there are some important components. So this includes having a header, a content section, and then having your separate sections organized nicely. So in your header, you'll want to sort of start your header and have something to sort of delineate the fact that it's your header. So here I have a couple hashtags followed by 4 dashes. And then you want at minimum to have your sort of who has written the script. So that'll be your name. If someone else has worked on that script with you as well, their name can go there too. Then you want a title, and you want this to be something descriptive so that if someone were to open up your script file, they can see from the get-go what the general idea is about what's going on in the script. And then finally, you'll want to have something along the lines of when it was maybe last edited, and this can sort of help with version control and things like that. And ISO 8601 date format is something that I would recommend you guys look up, and this is sort of the best way of trying to format your dates here. And it makes it easier for everyone anywhere to sort of understand the date. So then we have a contents sort of section. So the idea of this is sort of just underneath your header to sort of put down some information about the different sections you might have in your script. So here it's basically, this is my contents, and my first section is me setting up my RStudio environment. Then I'm going to do a section on exploratory data analysis before moving on to my actual analysis, and so on. Now, one good thing about RStudio as well is that if you end a line like this one with 4 hashtags or 4 dashes, what it will do is it will add this line to an outline in RStudio that looks like this. So you'll be able to see your header, your contents, but you can actually then click on these different sections, and that can help you get to the different sections of your code a lot easier. In the code, you can also then click a little arrow, and that will sort of collapse that section of code as well if you don't want to look at it and want to sort of make it a bit more streamlined whilst you're working. So then with your code chunks, you want to be starting every code chunk you do with a sort of line that starts with at least 1 hashtag. That's supposed to say hash, not has. And you want it to be a sort of descriptive title. So if you were making a box plot, you would say something along the lines of creating a box plot looking at Y and X. And then you would want to end that hashtag maybe with 4 hashtags if you want that to be in your content section. And if you can sort of use consecutive numbering, this can be useful in the future for people that are maybe wanting to, if you were talking with your supervisor about your data analysis, or if you were getting some help with your data analysis, it can be beneficial if someone can say, so in section 09, this is what I sort of noticed, rather than having to be like, oh yeah, it was a section about making a box plot somewhere, but I can't quite remember exactly which one, and then having to scroll through. And then we have what are called R script comments. And these are basically lines that you start with a hashtag. So if you want to make a comment, and this is any time you are in your R script, whether it's making your headers, your contents, or your section headers, or just generally wanting to sort of write down what it is that you're about to do in a bit of code, you can put a comment that starts with a hashtag. And if you don't put the hashtag at the start of your comment, I generally won't like it and will throw up a little angry error message at the bottom. So here you can see that I've sort of made a couple comment lines. So I'm on line 6, I'm talking about the fact that I'm about to make a vector of numbers, and below that is where I've made that vector of numbers. And then on line 9, I'm planning on calculating the mean, and you can see on line 10 that I've sort of gone about calculating the mean. So then in R, I briefly mentioned earlier about the fact that there is a little button at the top of your R script that you can click to run your code, but some other ways that you can run code, and generally I think most people end up reverting to this after a while, it sort of becomes a bit of a habit, is to just use keyboard shortcuts. So in Windows, that's just Control Enter, Macs, it's Command Enter, and then there is also the Run button. So then I have also found some little tips that I found useful myself when I've been writing code, and this includes sort of changing the appearance in your RStudio so that it's sort of better suited to what you like or how much time you might spend in RStudio, using rainbow parentheses, line wrapping, and then occasional other little keyboard shortcuts. So that brings us to about halfway through today's session. So what we'll do now is we'll start with some practice exercises, and I'll also do a little bit of live demonstrating on RStudio and setting up a project and those sort of things. So if I just leave this a second, then I'm just going to come here and open up RStudio. Which is always a painful wait, I find. Okay, so when you open up RStudio, there's a chance it will look something a little bit like this. Now, it's apparent, there we go. So what you can see here is my RStudio system. Here is a massive console pane, and then over here I have my global environment pane, and down here is my plots and files pane. Now, if I wanted to start an R script, what I can do is I can come up here to this little new file tab and click this, and there's multiple different options, but we'll just go with R script for now. And this is where you'll then see your script file. And this is sort of the run button I mentioned earlier. So yeah, but what can be really useful is to have a RStudio project. So to do that, if you go to File, you then click on New Project. And then what you can do is you can either link it with a new directory or an existing directory if you have an existing directory. And there is also the potential of using version control, but we're just going to go with a nice basic new directory for today. So I'm just doing an RStudio project, so I just want to click on New Project, and then I'm going to call my directory, Bootcamp, and we'll go 1.1 for module 1 and session 1. And then you want to click Browse so you can look at your files, and you guys can see my horrific filing system. But what we're going to do here is I'm going to just create a new folder and call it our Bootcamp. And then we'll find that folder, select that folder, click open, and that is now in here. Now, for future reference, if you ever start using GitHub, you can create a Git repository, but again, we won't be doing that today. And you don't have to worry too much about this one either. So then we'll just click Create Project. And what you can see is it's reopened. Again, no script file at the moment, but down here what you can see is, I might just zoom in actually, in case that helps. There we go. If I drag that over, what you can see here is you can see this is my working directory here, so you can see all the different folders I've gone through. And then it's created this rproj file, and this is your project file. So what you can do anytime after you've sort of finished working on your project for the day, if you were to close it and you came back the next day, you can literally just click this file and it will open whatever was left in your project earlier. So that is sort of how projects work. And then before I jump into looking at the scripts, I will just quickly show you how you can sort of change a few settings. So if you come up to Tools at the top and click Global Options, you'll get this sort of window pop up. And if you go to Appearance, here you can change what your RStudio might look like. So my RStudio is sort of in a more of a dark mode because I can often spend a lot of time in RStudio, and so I find it's a little bit more gentle on the eyes. But there are different options, and there's different color options and stuff like that. So you can pick any of them that you might find better or more preferable. And I think this is the one that I normally go for, so that's what we'll do. And then up here, there's also pane layout. And so here you can sort of actually decide to move your panes around if you want to, which can be useful depending on what you're doing. Cool. And then I believe if we jump to code, somewhere in this section is some helpful options. So here you can have it highlight the selected line and having it show line numbers. You can also down here get it to highlight our function calls. So we haven't particularly looked at what functions are yet, but if you keep this in mind for the future, when you have a function, that will show up in a different color. And then there's also this really fun thing that they've introduced recently where if you sort of are saying, hey, I want this particular graph to be in this color, it will actually show you a preview of what that color is in your script file so that you don't have to sort of keep guessing what color it is. And then there's also this use rainbow parentheses, and I find this really useful for when you're sort of getting into maybe a bit more complex code that has a lot more use of parentheses and nested parentheses, in ensuring that you have all of the closing ones that you need. And it can also help you find if you might have one or two missing or extra. Okay, so what I'm just going to do is I'm going to, in theory, pop over to the bootcamp and we'll jump into today's session. Now, this is what it sort of looks like. So if you want to in your own time, you are quite you're welcome to have another read through this. It has links for sort of help and downloading things as well, if that's of any use, and some sort of nice visual reminders of what everything is. But we will just pop down to the practice exercise section. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to download this script file. And then I need to find the folder that I just made, if I can remember what I called it. Okay. And whoops. We will then just also jump to my downloads. Okay, and I'm just going to drag this into that folder. And we'll close that. And then if I pop back into R, you can see that that script file is now in my working directory. And I can actually open this script file. And I'll just move this over so you can see it a bit better. And I'll put that down for now. But this is basically what a script file might look like. Now, you don't have to worry too much about what is going on in the script at the moment in terms of actual code. This is more just to sort of get an idea of what is actually how you might set up a script file. So the first problem here is essentially trying to read through the script and running the script to sort of have a look what it looks like. So if we just do that, we can see up here that we have our header. So we have who has written this script, and that is the RStats Bootcamp probably otherwise referred to as Ed Harris. And then we have what it is, which is essentially like your title, and this is the first bootcamp, and it's talking about setup and when it was last edited, which was quite a while ago actually. And then here we have a content section, and what you can do actually, before I forget to tell you, is up here we have this little sort of document outline button, and this is where you can see your little contents that's created by using these 4 hashtags or dashes at the end of your comment lines. So yeah, we have our contents here. This is giving us an idea of what we're sort of trying to do. So you can see this is section 0. This is where we want to just have a look at the data. And then down here we have section 1, where we're going to look at making a graph. So here you can see we have a nice section header. So we've started it with 2 hashtags instead of 1 hashtag, just to sort of make it look a little bit more visually different to standard comment lines. And then we've got a line of code here that is just explaining, sorry, we have a comment here that's just explaining the code below. So when you're writing comments, what is good practice usually is that the comment is describing what's going to be happening in the code directly below it. That's not always done that way. Some people might do it differently, and I know that I've definitely previously had comments sort of a bit all over the place, and sometimes I think when you're learning, that's probably actually quite useful, just to be able to feel like you can write comments wherever you want to write them. But sort of standard practice is when you write a line of code, the comment above it is what's describing it. So we then have another bit talking about printing the first bit of the code. And then this is sort of the help section, and this is making a box plot. So if I just bring up my console so that we can see what happens, I'll just hide this outline for now when I run the code. We're just going to, I'm going to click Control and Enter on my keyboard. 3, 2, 1. And you can see that it has printed out this sort of text down here in the console. But when you look at the global environment, you can see that the Iris dataset has appeared. Now, this dataset is a built-in dataset to R and RStudio. So at the moment, it's showing as a promise. But once we move on and we do the next line of code, you can see that that's changed to tell you a little bit more about it, including the fact that there's 150 observations of 5 different variables. But what you can see down here in the console is what is referred to as the head of the dataset, which is the first 6 lines of the dataset. And that's sort of a nice way of giving yourself a little preview as to what your data is, to see if there's anything glaringly obvious that might not be quite right with your data. Now, I mentioned earlier that in this files and plots pane, you can also view some help. So here I've just clicked on help and it's come up, but what you can do is if you put a question mark in front of what you need help with, whether that be a data set or a function, and then click Control Enter, the help will also come up. I'll just put that down. And here you can sort of see some information. So it's giving you a description about what the data is, how it's formatted, the sources and references, and then it's sort of showing you some examples as well at the bottom. And this can be really useful a little bit further into using R when you're using functions, etc., and you might be a little uncertain exactly what needs to be done to get it to work. Okay, so then we're just going to quickly run this box plot as well. Now you'll see here that it's on 2 different lines, but RStudio is pretty good in that it sees this as essentially one bit of code. And so even though I'm only on the 2nd line, if I click Control Enter, it will run both of them and create this box plot that is now shown up in the plots pane. So that is a very sort of quick run through of what this script sort of shows and how it works generally in RStudio. But again, I'll just show you here. You can sort of, it would work a little bit better in a slightly larger script, but you can sort of use this outline over here to sort of jump to your different sections if you use that, the sort of formatting where you have your 2 hashtags at the start and the 4 at the end. Okay, so then the second practice exercise we have is looking at adding a code chunk title to your contents section, making sure to have brief comments for your code and add the following code to your chunk, run it and examine the output. So for this sort of session, we don't need to worry too much about actually understanding what the code is doing. But what we're going to do is we're just going to jump down here and I'm going to make another section. So we're going to call this creating a new variable. Just bump that up a second so you guys can see it. And then I'm going to come up to my contents and also add it here. Okay. So now that I've got this new sort of code chunk, we want to start filling it in. So how do I create a new variable here? Or how do I start doing this? So I want to create a new variable. So I'm literally going to put create a new variable. And then I'm going to have my variable and whoops. We will just borrow the code from the Bootcamp page. So that's made my variable. And then I can also make a mean of my variable and my standard deviation. Now, I've just quickly copied that code across, but what you will want to do here is you might want to sort of explain what you're doing. So this will be, I am calculating the mean of my variable. Oops. And then again, the same for the standard deviation. I want to calculate the standard deviation for my variable. Cool. So that is sort of generally how you would sort of set out your little code section. And then you can sort of control enter, and you can see the results sort of put out down here. I ran them in a slightly backwards order, but this is the standard deviation and this is the mean. So that's sort of, spelled that incorrectly. That's a very quick sort of introduction to RStudio there and sort of the principles behind setting up an R script and that sort of thing. I would recommend that if you guys want to, if you have some time, to sort of have a play with this yourself. Try, you can sort of jump onto the Bootcamp and have a look at the example code there and do that. Or if you have your own sort of code that you're working on, you can maybe sort of just have a play around with setting up a script in preparation for the data analyses or tidying up an existing script that you might already have. Yeah, so that is all I have for you guys today. Hopefully that was clear and I didn't ramble too much for you. But if anyone has any questions, feel free and I will do my best to answer them. Also, if you have a question that you think of later, you can also email me. I have sent you guys emails about the Harrog meeting, so you should have my email somewhere in your inbox. Yeah, any questions? Okay, no worries. We're not going to save that. Okay. So, just as a reminder, for next week, we will be looking at our language a little bit more, which will hopefully, if you weren't too sure about some of the things that I just talked about, will hopefully clear some of that up for you. But yes, and I do also have a online system for suggestions of future sessions. So if at any point any of you have anything that you think might be of interest, not just to yourself, but to anyone, you can use that suggestion box, which the link to that box is in the emails that I sent out, and you can use that to make your suggestions, and I can look at scheduling them into future sessions. Okay, so I'll just stop sharing my screen.